Kyle Whittingham offered an update about his decision about when or if he will return for next season, and also provide an update on when Cam Rising will be making his decision on if he will return. Isaac Wilson was also ruled out for the remainder of the season. We're talking about all the updates that Kyle Whittingham provided on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first view and listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase today. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Utah beat reporter Michelle Bodkin. And Michelle, got to talk about everything that Kyle Whittingham laid out in his press conference. He talked about Isaac Wilson, what happened with the injury, also just some other interesting things like some players who already indicated their potential desire to come back for Utah. But we have to start with the future of Kyle Whittingham and then Cam Rising. Kyle Whittingham, when asked about his future, stated that it's one of those things that he is going to take his time and will evaluate his future after the season. And the decision, this was by far the biggest thing he said to me. His decision will be about what's best for the program, not himself. That to me is very interesting wording, because we know Kyle Whittingham is the ultimate competitor. And there's part of him that may not want to go out with a season like this. But when he makes a statement like that, what's best for this program moving forward, that to me also could indicate that maybe I'm not the best guy to lead this going forward. So I said recently, I feel like it's 50-50, like 51-49 about if he's going to come back or retire. Like, it still feels like there's a lot of ways that this can go. And I mean, a comment like that, I think, points to how this really could be, this Friday could be the last game Kyle Whittingham coaches at Utah. It's a very real possibility, right, Michelle?
Absolutely. I think anything and everything is kind of on the table at this point for the Utes. They have a lot of tough decisions to kind of work through and make, and that's going to start, I think, with some really tough self-evaluations, both from head coach on down, even to players. And I think it's an unfortunate part of this industry, but what's happened this year, kind of unacceptable based off of where this program has gone to. So it kind of points to that there just might be some really, like I said, tough, heartbreaking decisions that are made as far as what the future of this program is ultimately going to look like. And yeah, I mean, if you're taking Whitt's words at face value, to me, that sounds like someone that maybe is contemplating, I don't want to say doubt, that's maybe a little bit too strong of a word, but contemplating whether or not they have what it takes to continue on this journey and get the program where it needs to go. Is that ultimately what he decides? Who's to say? I mean, honestly, the only person that's going to know that is going to be Kyle Whittingham. And he's going to keep that very, very tight to the vest, as he has in his past when this has kind of come up. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to find out if actually a decision hasn't already been made. Who knows what's going on with that. What I do think and what I do feel confident about, though, is, like I said, there's just going to be some tough conversations in that building in this offseason, which starts shockingly early for this team for the first time since 2013.
I mean, 4-0 start to at least losing 7 of your last 8. And then obviously if you fall on Friday, very real possibility with how this team's looked. And obviously down to Batari now, even though he did some good things on last Saturday, but just when you go that deep into the depth chart, then it's going to be tough to win a cross-country road game when UCF is also trying to end their season on a high note. And yeah, I mean, the fact this team isn't bowl eligible when they started 4-0 is just the way they've lost all of these games with chances, plays to maybe win, and just consistently losing games. That's where you have to have tough conversations, because what was on the table for Utah, potential historic season, everyone's preseason pick to be Big 12 champs, and you don't just fall short of that, you fall like drastically, and that's not even like selling it to how badly this team is obviously underperformed that. Then there has to be changes made up and down your program. So it'll be interesting to see what those are. And one change that could be made not change, but coming into the year would be a change is Cam Rising, because when he did get hurt, he would be able to make his decision on whether or not he's going to return to Utah in the next week to 10 days, Kyle Whittingham said. So for me, when I look at this, I can't, Michelle, I can't see a world where Utah wants to do this again with Cam, or Cam wants to do this again. We've heard recently again, like Cam is frustrated, like just all the crap he's continued to get from the fans and everyone from not being able to play when he wants to be out there. He wants to go out there. I love what Cam Rising's done for this program. I don't think if you're Utah, like we take our emotions out of what Cam has meant for this program, I don't think you can move. I don't think you can go into the next season saying, hey, Cam Rising is our quarterback. He has the injury history he has. And I can't imagine Cam wants to come back with everything he's had to go through, as I mentioned. So I know he said he's going to take the next 5 to 10 days. I just have a really hard time seeing Cam Rising being on Utah's roster next fall.
That'll be an interesting thing to watch. I've heard some interesting things both ways. Again, I think there's a lot of tough things that Cam has had to weigh and probably is still weighing, and that Utah has to weigh when it comes to Cam Rising. It's how much do you want to beat up your body at this point? It's how much do you want to beat yourself up? Because some fans have made up their mind and have been disgustingly rude. I will throw that out there. And without, I think, knowing the full details or the full story, because Cam hasn't been able to speak for himself because of how the program runs their policy on injuries. So a lot of assumptions have been made by some people, and we all know what assume stands for. When you assume something, you make it of you and me. So it's some of you are wearing that very proudly. I will say that, just forthright. But it's, do you move on to the next phase of your life? What does that look like? Is it still at Utah as a GA? Do you want to go someplace else for a fresh start? Do you want to do something completely different than football? Do you feel like you still have something left to give to football? And if so, do you want to continue on with Utah, or do you want to maybe go someplace else? And then the questions start coming in. Well, if you do stay at Utah, there probably has to be some agreements and some parameters put in place. I think this is a case where he probably would have to earn it. If he comes in, I think this is at the point where Utah would have to say, you're not the incumbent starter, but you are more than welcome to stay and compete for the job. We'll bring some other people in, and hopefully they'll be comfortable also competing for the job. At boosters and some of that may, decide that they don't want to spend as much NIL on that. And it just depends on, are all parties agreeable? But like I said, I think there's a lot of tough conversations that have to be had in that arena. I think Cam's had to mull over a lot of tough things. And it'll be interesting to see where his mind's at, because he has been through the ringer, both physically and emotionally over the last couple of weeks. And it'll just be interesting to see where his headspace is at and where he kind of envisions himself moving forward one way or another.
It will be. And it's a very complicated situation when you talk about just what has happened with Cam Rising. And I totally agree with what you said too about the way that fans have treated him and what they've said about him when they don't know the extent of the injuries and how this is a guy who fights so hard to be out there. And it's just, I feel so bad for him that he's had the horrible injury luck that he has. And and what you said, Michelle, there's a lot of big decisions that Utah football has to make. One decision they don't have to make this week: who's going to be their starting quarterback? Luke Pittari played well last week when he came in late, but there's no controversy because of who's going to start, because Isaac Wilson is officially out for Utah's final game, so therefore out for the season. We're going to talk about Wilson's injury as well, the other key takeaways from Kyle Whittingham's press conference in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at Game Time. Game Picks is a new feature that filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Picks and Game Time is the place to be. Game Picks is the curation that makes it even easier to save, not just on sports, in case you're obviously we're out of Utah football home games to go to this year, but even if you're outside of Jazz, the Utah Hockey Club, there's also concert, comedy, and theater events that are available to purchase at Game Time. And one thing I love about Game Time is they have a seat view. So you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. I'm someone who, before I make that seat purchase, I want to know what my view is going to look like rather than just seeing a blank graphic. Well, with Game Time, we get that 3D panoramic view, so you can actually see what it looks like. And that's not all with Game Time. They have the low price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. How about that all-in pricing, a tog line, the feature that shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout? Because we all know what a hassle that could be when you're in the final stages of making your ticket purchase. And then you're like, wait, why did I just add an extra $30? That's not an issue with Game Time. Tell you the total up front. You can download Game Time today and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Picks. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege. It's capital L for locked, O for on, and all of college is capitalized. So the entire word of college is capitalized. The L in locked is capitalized. The O and on is capitalized. And there's no spaces between those. For $20 off your first purchase, terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Michelle. Another thing that was revealed is that we did find out that Isaac will miss Utah's final game against UCF. Kyle Whittingham did provide an encouraging update, or at least he said right now it's trending towards Isaac Wilson being available for spring ball, but said there is additional testing that has to be done. And we can talk about the season that Isaac had in a moment. But I do think the other thing that's just so unfortunate, the more I look back and watch that play, is I do feel it was dirty play. I don't know why the Iowa State player felt the need to roll after like that, knowing that often leads to an injury. The gator roll, that's something I think has been outlawed in the NFL. In college, honestly, it should be outlawed as well and should very least be a finable offense that happened there. So that's just really sick and unfortunate that that's how Isaac Wilson's season had to end. It's one thing when it happens when you're really competing, but the guy made the tackle and chose to roll like that. And Witt said that's how the injury happened, is because of the roll at the end like that. So that doesn't sit right with me, that this 18-year-old who's trying to compete out there and win games, and you get another guy who's just trying to compete. Like, this is where football is. You're not brothers in terms of like the other guys on the other sideline are the ones, your teammates are your brothers, but there's that mutual respect for each other. So then when we're going out of our way to hurt guys, that doesn't sit right with me. So I really don't like this is how Isaac's season came to a close.
Yeah. But you know what? I think a precedent has been set in the Big 12 as far as, what's called and what's not, as far as protecting players. And we kind of saw it with Cam Rising's first injury. You see it a little bit with how they choose to call or not call pass interference. There's just a lot of swallowing the whistles. And that's not to say that that's wrong or right. Don't come after me. But I'm just speaking the truth here. But, when you tend to swallow your whistles, when you tend to not make calls when things maybe cross the line too far, you open the door for stuff like that. And, so there you are. I can't be fined, so I don't mind saying things about the refs. But I think they have a bit of a problem on their hands, and I think they need to figure out how to get that under control. But to be perfectly frank, I think that's most conferences. We saw kind of a similar thing in the Pac-12 where certain things weren't called or were called, or the whole thing with Woody Dixon and that sort of thing. I think there's just a lot of oddness and weirdness and corruption that goes on with refereeing, and they're the only parties in college football that aren't actually held accountable. The coaches, the players, administration, all have to toe a fine line when they talk about things that they disagree with in terms of that. But nobody is really holding these referees accountable. So again, I think that opens the door for things like that to happen. And it's not just Isaac Wilson or Cam Rising in Utah. I think you can go through and pick out instances throughout the league and throughout the country. But that's just me. I will say perhaps you never wish an injury on, never ever, but having Wilson not available might be the biggest favor to Utah at this point in time, because I think there was a spark there with Batari that just hasn't been there with Wilson. I think we saw a similar thing with Brandon Rose before he got injured. But it just seems like if it was up to Utah at this point in time, they would continue to roll with Isaac. And I think senior class deserves an opportunity to really try and go out and win a last game. They've just done so much for the program. I don't think sinking the ship for the sake of, some reps for the young guy is necessarily fair. So the fact that decision's just automatically been made for you, I think, potentially bodes well for him. We'll see what happens. Obviously, you mentioned UCF is in a very, very similar boat. I think they're on their fourth quarterback now. So it's, again, and another team that started off the season very, very hot. So, I mean, they're going to be very motivated. It's going to be their senior night. It's their last game of the season as well, to try and make something happen and come out with a win. So we'll see how that ultimately works out. We'll see if that little spark that Batari provided last week when he did go into the game continues through this week, especially after getting the reps with the ones. But just crazy that 2 years in a row, Utah's rolling out a guy that honestly you're never expecting to have to play. And yet he's played some fairly significant minutes for them.
Back to the reffing thing you mentioned. But first of all, I just think it's funny as fan bases so often, like everyone will be like, oh, Pac-12 refs. Now we're doing Big 12 refs. Like, can we just stop that? Can we just say refs? Like, it's refs. You ask any fans. I'm sure SEC fans would say SEC refs. Like, basketball refs. Like, everywhere. It's just refs. Like, this is what refs do. They miss calls. They make mistakes. Like, they're often bad. It just happens. And you're right. We don't know everything that goes on behind the scenes with the reprimanding of refs. I really hope, if anything else, the ref who was talking and, like, egging on the fans, that can't happen. That I really hope that the Big 12, the head of officials, whoever it is, like took the time to make a call and make sure to squash that or do whatever to make sure that is a terrible look for the conference when you have a ref interacting with the crowd in that standpoint. So that's one thing there. And obviously I'll have to find another time to do it because Michelle, you are absolutely right that Luke Batari gives this team a better chance to win than Isaac Wilson right now. And this is one big reflection point the coaching staff is going to have to look at, when they review what went wrong this season. The best the Utah's offense has looked for stretches since Cam Rising went down is when Brandon Rose had his moment against BYU and Luke Batari late against who Utah just faced off against in Iowa State. That is a terrible look when the backup quarterback is not involved in that. And that is where you have to look at a program and say, why did we put Isaac Wilson out there? Did we really think he was the best guy, or were we just trying to prioritize development like that? That is really unfortunate. And like I said, it's a conversation that we'll have to have another day. Real quick, before we get to those returners that Utah's going to have, one thing I thought that was just cool to continue to see is Kyle Whittingham did mention how Morgan Scalley is going to continue to be involved in all of the big decisions that Utah has moving forward because he's the head coach in waiting. If Kyle Whittingham comes back for one more year, that's on the table right now. But with the way everything's going, I can't see Kyle Whittingham being the coach of Utah in 2026 right now. So, at the very least, that Morgan should take over then, just based on what is transpiring currently. And honestly, if you maybe say, which way do you lean based on everything that's being stated, I'd say this is probably Kyle Whittingham's final game on Friday. So I like that Morgan continues to be involved, even though we don't know what Whittingham is going to do. Eventually, Morgan's going to take over not just the program as it is, but obviously all the future players and recruits they're bringing in. So I like that Utah and Witt have moved forward with Morgan Scalley at the forefront of every decision too.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. Again, you're essentially planning on at some point handing the keys over to him. It might be, after Friday's game. It might be a year from now. I would be a little shocked at this point, but it could be at the end of Witt's contract. I don't see it going much beyond that. I don't think there will be a renewal or anything like that. But ultimately, we know that the point that this is going to be Morgan's program is coming. And when you already kind of know who you're handing it off to, yes, they need, and they're already in the program and they're involved with the program, you have to let them have some say in what's happening. First of all, it's good for getting Morgan comfortable making those decisions on his own. And secondly, he has to inherit all of this. So, it has to be a situation that both parties are kind of okay with and can agree upon, or that flat out Morgan just likes and agrees with. It just, depending on ultimately what happens there. But, it's, again, these are going to be very, very tough conversations about Kyle Whittingham, tough conversations about Cam Rising, tough conversations about who the new OC is going to be, what staff is retained. I unfortunately think there's going to be some conversations, surrounding that. I'm not going to throw out, who I think is maybe in trouble or not. That's not my place. But when you have a poor performance like you did this year, especially with the expectations being as high as they were, you have to start questioning, who else you have in place that was making decisions. And that's never easy. There's other kids they're going to have to make decisions on as far as, performance and NIL expectations and playtime expectations. And there's just a lot this program has to sort out. And I don't mean that to sound negative or all doom and gloom, because I don't think it's necessarily quite that level. But it's stuff they have to nip in the bud. Because if this goes on for another year, then you're going to start looking into, it's going to get harder and harder to get out of it.
It's absolutely the truth. I mean, we said at the start, 7 losses, unacceptable. Like Utah, to me, if it wasn't for Florida State, they would be they are the second most, like Utah legitimately is to me the second most disappointing team in college football. Just when you look at the preseason expectation where we thought they'd finish to where they have ended up at, it's incredibly disappointing. And even to see teams like, who else was one of the more disappointing teams? Kansas. And they figured it out now. And now 3 weeks in a row, they've been the Big 12 giant slayer, knocking out all these other contenders. So that's where it's just unfortunate that Utah hasn't been able to ever really find their stride, ever get over the hump. And when you can't do that, you winning games is what put Utah on the pedestal that they were coming into the season, why they have the reputation. And they will not have that reputation going into next season, and it takes time to rebuild that with the type of disastrous year they've had so far. So I think you're right. There probably will be changes. We already mentioned, Whittingham mentioned 10 to 15 guys in the portal. That makes a lot of sense to me because you need to bring in more starters and experience. You're going to lose a number of guys as well. So a lot to rebuild if you're Utah. But one thing Utah doesn't have to rebuild is 2 key positions potentially, because they got the news that a couple of players have indicated a desire to return. Who are those individuals? We're going to tell you in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. This is at FanDuel.com to join today. You can start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Yes, Utah football is our last opportunity on Friday to bet on some Utah football action. But what else do we have coming up? We got Utah Jazz season rolling on, the NHL Hockey Club in action, and obviously all of the lacrosse, the NBA, the NHL. NFL still rolling on. College football, we'll have conference championship weekend coming up. College basketball is beginning. FanDuel is your place to be. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And once again, you can start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started today. Michelle, closing this one out. Not a lot of positive updates in Utah's press conference today, but a potentially positive update was at the end. Kyle Whittingham said that linebacker Le'Veon Demooney, who's been a really good player for Utah last year, and they've really missed his depth, especially when Karene Reed was out. You really missed Demooney being on the field. And then the veteran corner that Utah added was Kenan Johnson, and he got hurt in the first game of the season. Those are 2 brutal injuries and guys that Utah only got a combined 1 game out of this year. both have indicated a desire to return. To me, that's massive because you're already going to be losing Zamiah Vaughn. So you bring back an experienced corner who's had the time to rehab and get right. And then Demooney, an experienced linebacker, when you're going to lose one of the leaders in the front seven in Corene Reed. If Utah could get both these players to for sure come back, I think those would be massive gets because Utah's missed both of them at several points on the season.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to bring back experience and you always want to bring back guys that want to be there, right? And of course, Witt did kind of indicate I need to follow up with them again, that these were conversations we had a while ago. Maybe there's a change of heart. Maybe they want to enter the transfer portal. But at least in the here and now, it sounds like they're very interested in being back. The other caveat is you have two guys kind of in different places in their rehab that could also play a significant role in ultimately what happens. Levani Demooney, actually this past summer at the Across the Green golf tournament, told me and some other people he was really hoping to be back by October. He was feeling good. He was walking around. He looked great. But obviously that didn't happen. And again, there's a big difference between what you want to have happen and what actually does happen. We saw that with Brant Keithy the other year and Cam Rising. They wanted to be back, but what they wanted was not what happened. And I think a very similar thing kind of happened with Demooney as well. But it does sound like he is on pace and where he needs to be. Witt said that if he does in fact return for Utah, they expect him to be ready to go for winter conditioning. Now, Kenan Johnson, on the other hand, it turns out very serious injury. And at least as of right now, Whittingham is saying that more evaluations need to be had, but he's probably not going to be back until fall camp, if not later. So, that can really put some weight on, what you want to do in that situation, because he's not any good to you, as cruel and as cold as that sounds, if he's not able to practice and participate and get into game shape. So, what do you do about that? I don't know. I will say for Kenan's part, he did the homework, he did the research when he chose to come to Utah the first go around. So it's not surprising to me that he's interested in returning. Sharif Shah kind of indicated that he sought them out because of the research he had done. So there's some investment there on his part. Does the recovery go the way that it needs to go in order for him and Utah to make it make sense? Again, another hard conversation that has to be had. So we'll see what ultimately happens with those two. But it was a slightly positive report update. And then the other kind of interesting under the radar comment was, of course, Witt indicating that Isaac would be ready to go in spring ball. Obviously, there's been some speculation. Does he stay? Does he go? And again, that's completely and totally up for debate. But to me, if you're thinking or expecting he'll be back by spring ball, that to me sounds like you maybe had some positive conversations with him that he wants to stay and maybe give it another go. So we'll see what happens.
We will. There's a lot that's going to transpire for this Utah team. Really quick, because I see some of you guys in the comments talk about Isaac. I'm not ready to give up on Isaac. I see this all the time. People try to make who he is as a freshman and say that's who he's going to be for his whole career. Isaac should have never been on the field this year. I still believe in the potential that's there. He's flashed moments of elite quarterback play, and I still think he can transform into that guy at Utah. Do I think that'll be in his sophomore year? Probably not right now. But do I think he still has a chance to be a really good quarterback? I do. So I hope that Utah is able to retain Wilson and bring him back in the NIL era. You never know what's going to happen with these guys and the offers they may get and things. But I still believe Wilson can long-term be that guy. And there's so many quarterbacks. You can look at how they looked at freshman year to what the junior, senior year, even sophomore year held for them. Wilson should have never been on the field. So I really think it's crazy to me that people are writing off and saying this is who he is as a college quarterback. So that's an aside we'll get into more the other day. But Michelle, there is so much going on with this Utah football team. If people are trying to keep it all straight, where do they need to head over to?
Yeah, definitely check out utezone.com. That's where all my work and several others' work is housed. And then, of course, you can follow me on social media, X, Threads, and Instagram. It's @Bodkin is a boss.
Well, thank you again. Appreciate you stopping by, Michelle.
No problem, JT. Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We still got one last game to talk about on Friday. We're breaking down UCF, talk about some of the other comments that Kyle Whittingham made, particularly about 10 to 15 players in the transfer portal that Utah could be looking to target. Still a loaded week on Locked On Utes, and we hope you'll join us again tomorrow.